Chilling tales for dark nights.
Want to make sure you never miss a Chilling Tales for Dark Nights video again? Be sure to subscribe and hit that bell to turn on notifications.
Allow me to let you in on a secret. Something not even my counterparts, from past or present, are entirely aware of. You may have noticed that we all sound remarkably the same. It is because, in fact, we are. Not merely in that we resemble one another in some way, but in that we are, in fact, all one in the same. Not merely as character for you here, but as well as throughout all of space and time. Particularly time. It is only from my unique perspective that I am able to see that which they and most of you do not. We are, while beings associated with your holiday of Christmas to your understanding, in fact a bit more elemental than that. Think of us as avatars for time itself. You humans have a rather peculiar, and I might say special, relationship with time. As you perceive it in a linear fashion, its inevitable unraveling before you presents perpetual mystery and potential to your minds. Though, in point of fact, neither actually exist, your perception of such colors your lives and experiences, affording a deeper sense of connection to your place in the universe. Perhaps an example of this is in order. Whereas past will bring you through your memories and even show you events which you were not a part of that fed into the continuity of your life, and present seeks to afford context for that continuity. My place is to explore with you potential. Whereas the case of Martin was one where the subject was rendered incapable of envisioning the future due to the events of his past. Another case, involving a man named Nathaniel, took on an entirely inverted nature. Nathaniel was one whose inability to take pleasure in the spirit of the season was not rooted in his clinging to the past as such, as much as his perpetual worry about the future. Humans are meant to learn from their mistakes, and even tragedies, as they mature. We step in when this maturation develops negatively in ways that defy the course of things, while some become embittered or scarred over the course of their lives, and others stuck and mired in the events of their past. Cases such as Nathaniel's are what occurs when one seeks to use the past as an indicator of the future to a toxic degree. Nathaniel was a very bright man. His intelligence was well above average, and he had always had a knack for dynamic thinking. The sort where potentiality became factors for him to work out as a means to semi-divine the future. Now, as a side note, we have only once encountered one of your kind with the actual ability to predict the future, though that was less a matter of actual foresight and more a matter of a perception of time. But I'm getting ahead of myself with that concept, as tends to happen for one in my position. With Nathaniel, however, potential courses of events and their potential outcomes would constantly bloom within his mind whenever confronted with a situation of most any kind. Though this made for him to be an excellent chess player, it also caused often intense, crippling anxiety, causing him to withdraw from society whenever possible. Christmas was exceptionally bad for Nathaniel. This being as in his youth, one Christmas Eve, his parents had purchased a discount Christmas tree, which itself was rather dry. Their house was small and rather old. but provided a happy home to Nathaniel, his parents Mark and Judy, and his little sister Bethany. The family had retired for the night, allowing the previously roaring fire in their fireplace to die down. It was, however, as I mentioned, a rather older house and sadly somewhat drafty. By what many would call a freak occurrence, one of these drafts managed to blow some hidden, still smoldering embers from the fireplace up and across the room to land upon the tree. The fire which resulted burned fast and hot and took little time to properly engulf the small single-level dwelling. Upon first hearing the smoke alarm, his parents leapt out of bed, only to find the fire already creeping down the hall, blackening the air with thick smoke. His mother rushed to his room, plucking him from his bed, while his father dashed further down the hall to where his sister slept. Sadly, though, as Judy made it out of the front door with the small and shivering Nathaniel in her arms, the flames grew higher and made escape impossible for Mark. The man and his little girl burned to death that Christmas Eve, while the boy and his mother sat helplessly in the snow outside, unable to do anything but watch as their hope rapidly waned and turned to tragic sadness. As he grew older, Nathaniel constantly pored over what had happened, asking the ever-pointless question of why. However, as he matured into a man, this question of why gradually became the ever-present question of how. From there, predicting or attempting to predict threat and oncoming tragedy consumed him entirely. Often, the very sight of a fireplace or even lit candle would cause great pangs of fear and anxiety, as he knew with personal certainty that the slightest flicker in the wrong direction could spell absolute disaster for everyone around. Upon buying his own home as a grown man, his first act was to seal up the fireplace, which sat in the living room with bricks and mortar. Though inert, the potential of disaster, as in all aspects of his life, dominated his every thought and action. By the time he grew to the age of 40, Nathaniel had become what most would describe as a neurotic mess. Though always invited by friends and relatives to join them for Christmas, his incessant fear of potential catastrophe left him unable and unwilling to even consider leaving the safety of his meticulously managed home, within which he had fireproof, flood-proofed, and just about any other form of proofing one can imagine. For Nathaniel, the joys of the season were as lost as joy in general, as he knew without a doubt that death, destruction, and tragedy awaited him and everyone else around at every turn, unless managed and prevented. This gave way to a life so painfully oriented forward, with its roots in his past, that he could ultimately neither move on from what had happened nor see his present for what it really was. All that he could see or conceive of was the potential of what was to come. It was for this reason that while past collected his regrets and missed opportunities for happiness, and presented the ongoing opportunities as he was foregoing them, it fell to me ultimately to reorient his perspective in a rather unorthodox fashion. Nathaniel lived in constant fear of potential futures, and typically, I will show our subjects just that in order to present them with at least the sensation of choice in the matter of what is to come for them. With Nathaniel, though, as these potentials were all he conceived of, hence ruining not only Christmas but life in general, I instead decided to reveal some truth your kind only tends to be enlightened to after you have moved on from the mortal plane. This is that there is no difference between past, present, and future. They are, or rather we are, or rather I am, what you might call a simultaneous and inalterable constant. I fear I may be losing you here. So, remember how I had referenced one who could predict the future by virtue of their perception of it? That is truly what separates your kind from the truth of time. Perception. Whereas past exists in moments leading up to what you call the present, and present exists in a perpetual state of flux while gliding along your perceptions, I exist in a fashion that allows me to see the totality of it all. The same way past influences the present and the present is influencing the future, all events throughout the course of a human life act like puzzle pieces forming a picture. That picture, however, regardless of how assembled or not assembled the puzzle might be, remains what it is in spite of its relative immediate state. An easier way to explain this is as such. Last night, odds are good you laid your head down somewhere to sleep. It could have been your own bed, or somewhere else. However, regardless of where you were, you wound up there due to the confluence of events which transpired leading up to it, and time progressed for you afterwards. In this same vein, as you will lay your head down to rest tomorrow somewhere, where you end up, and your disposition then will be likewise the inevitable result of what is happening now and what factors arise from now until then. These events are themselves, in fact, unalterable. While in most cases I will lead our subjects through potential futures that their actions can affect and lead to, the true function there is simply to provide context in order to guide them towards their true and inevitable future. In essence, I simply give them the visions they need in order to get where they are going. It is not changing the picture the puzzle pieces form, but really just a piece unto itself. It may not always result in a desirable outcome for the subject, but it is always resulting in the necessary one. In Nathaniel's case, this revelation allowed him to finally let go, as without giving too much away. I allowed him to see that the catastrophe he'd spent his life fearing and trying to avoid would never have come to pass, nor would they come to pass moving forward. That his future was in fact already determined and, in effect, unalterable. This set his mind finally at ease and allowed him to actually live out his life without his constant dread or worry. This is actually a rare reaction from your kind. A question nearly all of you ask yourselves at some point throughout the courses of your lives, of whether you would wish to know the time and manner of your eventual death or not, with all the existential implications such knowledge would create, is typically one preferring ignorance as opposed to foresight. This being because while giving one an endpoint to count down to and dread if revealed, it also generally removes the nature and fundamental meaning to life and considering the future at all. For Nathaniel, however, it provided much needed relief, allowing him to feel safe in the knowledge that ultimately his worry was all for naught. A rare reaction, to be sure, hence why I only apply such a technique in very rare and very special circumstances. Nathaniel is not alone in facing such a plight, however. In fact, a great number of your kind waste countless amounts of your honestly limited time fretting and worrying about the what-ifs of a future in a universe where uncertainty itself only comes from a lack of prescience due to your limited perspectives. As past noted, we exist dimensionally in a manner in relation to you, much akin to the way you do when perhaps looking at a drawing of a stick figure. Perhaps a better example would be to consider a book. Whether you've read it or not, the end has already been written by the time you pick it up. Pages all exist in a single contiguous constant, which forms the totality of the work. Your lives and time on this plane are much like a book in this exact manner. Though I'm certain by now I am likely badgering the point. Ultimately, our existence and function could be called and considered temporal interventionism. Though guided by what I suppose you would call fate, through time in a direction you would call forward, we exist and dip our metaphorical toes into your time stream to help you along your path. Past appears in the form of one you knew before, as it creates a link between you and those moments. Present appears as someone you've never met, to illustrate for you the presence of immediacy in being and the potential for life to happen in the moment. I appear typically, as many of your writers and storytellers would have you believe, as some form and manifestation of death. This is because it is one of the only true certainties you all share. Or, well, almost all of you share. I shan't comment about that, as it serves little purpose to my lesson for you here. It is important to remember the past without dwelling needlessly upon it or letting it control you entirely. It is important to live in the present moment and allow for new memories to form from new experiences. It is finally important to consider the future, but not fret or worry too much about it. Remembering it shall happen, and that it shall happen just as it needs to, no matter what, can afford some peace of mind, allowing your life to follow its natural course moment by moment, love by love, loss by loss, and Christmas by Christmas. Many of you tend to forget these things. That's where we come in. Or rather, that's where I come in. Each day is yours. Make them good ones. And Merry Christmas.
Chilling tales for dark nights.